Now, I originally was not going to respond to Prager U's video on Che Guevara, but when I found out who the narrator was, I had to. Why? Because the video is a great example of the moral depravity and revolting hypocrisy of many in the anti-communist movement. Just look at the history of the narrator, Gloria Alvarez. She is on record for defending Rios Montt, the right-wing dictator who carried out genocide against the Mayan indigenous people of Guatemala, wiping out entire villages and killing up to 75,000 people in just over 1 year. Furthermore, the main source she uses for her arguments in this video is this book, entitled Exposing the Real Che Guevara and the Useful Idiots Who Idolize Him, by Humberto Fontova. Now, a quick Google search about Fontova shows that he does not give a damn about human rights. In fact, he is on record for defending Jorge of Hungary, Franco of Spain, and the bombing of Guernica by the German Condor Legion in the Spanish Civil War. Now, the bombing of Guernica is considered to be the first deliberate air attack on civilians in history, a war crime. Now, the title of this Prager U video is Who Celebrates Che Guevara? Well, we can certainly say those who defend genocidal dictators and the crimes of fascist states certainly do not, although I doubt Che would have been too upset about that. So I made this video in order to show the hypocrisy and depravity of some of these anti-communists who think they can lecture others on human rights. With that out of the way, let's begin.
Imagine wearing a t-shirt, or displaying a poster, or waving a flag, emblazoned with the face of a brutal killer who openly expressed racist anger at blacks and indigenous people, and undisguised disgust for gays. Well, it's not something you have to imagine. It's done every day. Somewhere on a college campus or at a social justice protest, somebody is celebrating a psychopath. The famous face, of course, belongs to Ernesto Che Guevara.
So that was her introduction. Now, as you might have guessed, the points she makes here fall apart when she elaborates on them in the main body of the video.
It's one of the most perverse jokes in modern life that so many people, especially young people, exalt him as a hero. Strange hero. He personally murdered or had murdered and personally tortured or had tortured thousands of Cuban citizens. He would have happily murdered and tortured many more if he had lived longer.
No credible source claims that Che Guevara killed and tortured thousands of people, not one. According to an actual historian, John Lee Anderson, author of Che, A Revolutionary Life, Che Guevara was responsible for executing 55 people, none of them innocent. In an interview in 1997, John Lee Anderson stated, quote, "I have yet to find a single credible source pointing to a case where Che executed an innocent. Those persons executed by Guevara or on his orders were condemned for the usual crimes, punishable by death at times of war or in its aftermath, desertion, treason, or crimes such as rape, torture, or murder. I should add that my research spanned 5 years and included anti-Castro Cubans among the Cuban-American exile community in Miami and elsewhere." End quote. So not only did Che not kill thousands, those who were executed were criminals, not innocent people. So Gloria Alvarez is simply spewing right-wing propaganda.
He would have happily murdered and tortured many more if he had lived longer. The only thing that stopped him was a bullet. He was killed in 1967 at the age of 39, trying to organize a communist revolution in Bolivia. They say only the good die young. Che was an exception. But Che still captures the popular imagination. Why? Hell if I know. Unless you're into sadistic thug worship, I am at a loss.
So she is against sadistic thug worship. Now, I think it is an excellent time in the video to highlight once again her record. She not only defended Rios Montt, but claimed that a genocide did not take place under his rule. Well, the official Guatemalan Historical Clarification Commission disagrees. Quote, "The Commission's conclusions on the genocide has been based primarily on witnesses' testimonies and the atrocious nature of some of the massacres. Entire villages had been destroyed, and all their inhabitants killed. The policy had been total destruction, not only scorched earth, but in some cases every human being had been killed, including women, children, babies, and elderly people. Pregnant women and babies had been victimized with particular brutality, as described in the chapter of the report on atrocities committed against women. Whole villages disappeared under Rios Montt, a person who the host said she respects, a mass murderer who killed women and children. Evidence aplenty for that. Entire villages were wiped out. But according to this person, Che is a sadistic thug, because he executed 55, the highest estimate being 105, of Batista's torturers and murderers. Let's remember that Batista, the person who Castro and Che overthrew, killed 20,000 people in 7 years. Should the people who committed those atrocities have escaped justice? Keep in mind, I am against the death penalty, but according to several historians, if these executions had not taken place, people whose families had been repressed by Batista would have taken justice into their own hands. The consensus is that the vast majority, if not all, of those executed by both Castro and Che were guilty as charged.
This is nonsense. The real Che was a murderous, homophobic, racist hypocrite. Yet Che flags are a feature at Black Lives Matter protests. Go figure. Here is Che on race. The black is indolent and a dreamer, spending his meager wage on frivolity or drink.
First of all, being lectured on racism by someone who defends a genocidal racist dictator is ridiculous. Now to the issue. When Che wrote this racist comment, he was only 24, and was not even a communist at the time. However, when in power in the late 50s and 60s, Che was clearly a supporter of racial equality, supporting national liberation movements in Africa and attacking the US for its segregationist policies. Furthermore, with the implementation of socialism, segregation, often privately implemented in Cuba, ended, which allowed Afro-Cubans access to parts of the country they did not have access to before. Furthermore, Che was a known supporter of liberation struggles in Africa. His translator in the Congo noted that Che showed the same respect to black people as he did to whites.
Che explicitly stated that his vision of socialist utopia did not include blacks. "We're going to do for blacks exactly what blacks did for the revolution," he said, by which I mean nothing.
This quote does not even have a primary source. In fact, it has only ever appeared in secondary sources that tend to lean heavily to the right and can therefore be dismissed as drivel.
Those magnificent examples of the African race who have maintained their racial purity thanks to their lack of an affinity with bathing.
Like the first quote she uses, Che wrote that racist remark when he was 24, in his diaries, before he was a communist. Many attribute it to his upbringing. He grew up in a white, wealthy family, which explains his racist arrogance in his early years. But thankfully, by the time of the revolution, he had completely reversed his views. This is why he is praised by the likes of Nelson Mandela, whilst he is condemned by those who support fascists and genocidal racist dictators.
If you want to cancel George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, what do you do with Che?
George Washington and Thomas Jefferson not only owned slaves, but also encouraged genocide against Native Americans. Che Guevara, by contrast, when he held political power, supported national liberation movements and racial equality. So there is a massive difference.
We see a similar confusion among the LGBTQ crowd. Che's face decorates many a pride poster and a rainbow t-shirt, and yet Che was an unapologetic homophobe. He called gay men perverts. He locked them up in camps and forced them to labor under a sign that read, "Work will make you men." In 2017, HuffPost published an article titled, "Are you gay? Che Guevara would have sent you to a concentration camp." The crusading humanitarian is not exactly checking the intersectional boxes, is he?
First of all, at the time, homosexuality was illegal across the world. In Britain, for example, Alan Turing, the English mathematician who broke the German code, was chemically castrated. for being a homosexual. So if Che was a raging homophobe, it would not have been surprising. However, the claims Gloria Alvarez makes about Che do not stand up to scrutiny. For one, the only homophobic statement Che Guevara made was in a diary entry in the early 50s. I could not find any other homophobic statements after this. Furthermore, when these camps were established, Che was not in the country. Fidel Castro took full responsibility in his later years for these camps.
Like a good Marxist, he claimed to despise luxuries and creature comforts, yet his Havana home was a vast mansion with a swimming pool, 7 bathrooms, a sauna, a massage room, a private yacht harbor, and 5 TVs. Not exactly an anti-materialist setup.
The claim about Che's possessions comes from Humberto Fontova's book. There does not seem to be much evidence elsewhere. Should we believe Fontova's half-baked drivel? No. Furthermore, despising luxuries is not what Marxism is about. In fact, Marx wrote that one of the aims of communist society is to make the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly. Marxism does not encourage people to take vows of poverty. You are thinking of Christianity, where such vows are actually encouraged.
He was a liar. He lied about everything. He lied about being a doctor. He wasn't. There is no record that he ever graduated from medical school.
Che received his diploma in 1953. He just never practiced as a doctor.
He lied about being a military genius. He wasn't. He botched just about every military operation he ever led.
This is blatantly untrue. Just look at the 1958 Battle of Santa Clara, where revolutionaries, commanded by Guevara, defeated a much larger and better equipped force. Any honest observer would call this a great victory and a military triumph.
He lied about knowing how to manage an economy. In fact, he trashed a growing Cuban economy during his brief span as Ministry of Industries. People have long forgotten that Cuba, in the 1950s, before Fidel and Che took over, was one of the strongest economies in Latin America. According to a 1957 UN report, the average wage for an 8-hour day in Cuba is higher than for workers in Belgium, Denmark, France, and Germany.
Now the source used here leads straight to an article written by Humberto Fontova. He claims that it is from a 1957 report from the ILO, or the International Labour Organization. Now I attempted to look at the source, which is why this video took me longer than I expected, but failed to find it. However, I did find another interesting article written by Stephen Cushion, who states that the ILO has very little information about Cuba. The one report that is available was written in 1952. Now that report described Cuba's chronic problems with unemployment and underemployment, its great inequalities, and its exaggerated dependence on the export of a single product, sugar. Hardly growing praise, is it? In fact, they predicted that the economy would severely deteriorate due to this reliance. This graph comes from a separate World Bank report, detailing the chronic unemployment of rural workers. So no, Che and Castro did not inherit a gold-class economy. They inherited an economy with serious problems, which is probably one of the reasons why their revolution was successful. Helen Yaffe wrote an excellent book about Che's time as Minister for Industries. In it, she highlights the fact that Che attempted to diversify the economy and also introduced technical colleges in order to train the once chronically unemployed workforce. This was extremely necessary, especially when many of the technicians, who tended to be wealthy, had left the country after the revolution.
What may be worse than Che's endless lies about himself is that so many people lied for him. I'm talking about the left-leaning journalists, academics, and A-list Hollywood stars and directors. They are the ones who built up, marketed, and have perpetuated the constellation of falsehoods that surround the hate-filled revolutionary. Why did they do it? One simple reason: Because Che personifies anti-Americanism.
According to John Coatsworth, from 1960 to 1990, far more people were murdered by US-backed dictatorships in Latin America than were killed in the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact countries. So why wouldn't people celebrate a person who fought against a superpower that backed Latin America's worst tyrants? Nelson Mandela saw him as a hero, as do numerous others who fought for liberty and freedom. Now, I made this video to basically highlight the hypocrisy of some anti-communists, condemning Che Guevara whilst praising dictators that murdered thousands of unarmed people. Never let conservatives who hate Che Guevara forget that in Latin America, the ideology of anti-communism was the biggest killer in that region.